What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of On the Pond Hockey Talk with your host, Adam Steer. Now, today, I am very excited to announce part 2 of the 4-part Seattle Kraken mock expansion draft roster, where I go through each of the divisions within the NHL and talk about who I believe the Seattle Kraken are going to select from each of the teams, as well as going through all of the teams and figuring out who they are going to keep and who they are going to expose and ultimately lose to Seattle. So I got my Mark Scheifele Winnipeg Jets jersey on, and we are ready to talk the Central Division. So with that being said, let's get into it. So first up, we have the Chicago Blackhawks. So I have the Blackhawks keeping 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie. So up front, I have the Blackhawks keeping Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Alex DeBrincat, David Kampf, Lucas Wallmark, Alex Nylander, and Dylan Strome. So there's a few obvious picks here for them to keep. We have Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, DeBrincat, and Strome. Those are the clear-cut obvious 4 in my opinion. And then moving on, we have Alex Nylander, who's still a very high upside player with a good amount of speed and skill. So I think they're going to want to still keep him around moving forward. And then depth players like David Kampf and Lucas Wallmark, I believe the Blackhawks still will want to keep, which ultimately leads John Quenneville being exposed. And I believe Seattle will take him if he's there at the spot. I think the fact that John Quenneville is a young player, he's a controllable asset. He scored 13 goals in 36 games last year in the American Hockey League. I think that's enough reason for them to take him at that pick. So moving on to the defense and goaltending here. So we have Brent Seabrook and Duncan Keith. Obviously, they have to be kept regardless because of their no move clauses. Oh, yikes, that Seabrook contract is not very good. Regardless, they also have Nikita Zadorov, who they're keeping. Now, I like Zadorov as a player. I think he'll provide a lot of stability on the left side of their D-core. So I definitely have them keeping Zadorov. And I have them exposing Connor Murphy and Calvin DeHaan. So I wouldn't be surprised if Seattle took one of these 2 defensemen, but I think ultimately you have to look at the term and the salary of John Quenneville and say, listen, we got to take this guy. And then I have the Blackhawks keeping Malcolm Subban, leaving Connor Delia exposed. So I have John Quenneville ultimately getting taken by the Seattle Kraken. Next up here, we have the Colorado Avalanche. Now, I have the Avalanche keeping 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie. Now, they're a bit more interesting to dissect because they have some guys in Brandon Saad and Gabriel Landeskog that are UFA after the end of the season. So it's going to be very intriguing to see what happens with those 2, who signs and who doesn't. I personally don't think they'll be able to sign both of them. But regardless, up front, I have the Avalanche keeping Mikko Rantanen, Nathan MacKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, Andre Burakovsky, Nazem Kadri, JT Compher, and Tyson Jost. So this is an absolutely loaded group up front, one of the harder groups to figure out in terms of who they're going to be keeping, but I really like this group of forwards that they would be keeping. I don't really see Brandon Saad being kept long-term, but I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised if they did sign him to a deal. So these are the forwards I have them keeping. Moving on to the back end of the Colorado Avalanche here. On defense, I have them keeping Eric Johnson, Samuel Girard, and Cale Makar. So first on Eric Johnson, that is not a pretty contract, and the fact that they have to keep him with that no-move clause sucks because they are going to lose a fantastic defenseman here. They also are protecting Samuel Girard, who signed that great long-term deal, and Cale Makar, who's a superstar. I love this guy. He won the Calder. There's nothing more, I could say about Cale Makar. He's just that great, I think, and he's going to be a special player. And goaltenders, I have the Colorado Avalanche keeping Philip Grubauer. I think after last year, he really proved that he has the chance to be the guy there. If he could be healthy for them in the playoffs, we'll see what happens moving forward with Grubauer. But I have the Colorado Avalanche losing to Seattle Ryan Graves. I think the fact that he was a top pair defenseman last year on Colorado, playing key heavy minutes. He's a big defenseman, good Canadian kid. I really like this guy, and I think that would be a great fit for the Seattle Kraken. So Ryan Graves gets selected from Colorado here to the Seattle Kraken. Next up here, we have the Dallas Stars. So I have the Stars keeping 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie. The forwards I have them keeping are Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, Alex Radulov, Radek Faksa, Rup Hintz, Dennis Gurianov, and Jason Dickinson. So this shouldn't be a surprising list at all here, in my opinion. The only surprise maybe is Joe Pavelski, but the fact that he's 36, 37 years old, he's making $7 million into the next few seasons. I don't believe that Seattle should look into taking him, but most likely I think he will be available. So these are the forwards I have Dallas keeping and ultimately exposing to Seattle. Moving on to the defense and goaltending of the Dallas Stars. On the blue line, I have them protecting Esa Lindell, John Klingberg, and Miro Heiskanen. These are pretty easy decisions here because all 3 of these guys are absolute studs. and are going to provide Dallas with one of the best blue line cores moving forward over the next couple years. And in net, I have them keeping Ben Bishop. I know Khudobin had a great playoff, but I still think Ben Bishop's the guy, and he also has a no-move clause. That might be important to know, which ultimately leaves Jamie Alexiak to be exposed. I believe that if he's there with this pick, I believe that Seattle is going to take him. He's a bit of a more experienced defenseman. He's still only 27 years old right now. He's pretty cheap, so I believe Jamie Alexiak is my prediction to be picked by Seattle in the expansion draft. Next up here, we have the Minnesota Wild. So, as you can see here, I have the Minnesota Wild projecting 8 skaters and 1 goalie. It's the first time we've seen this so far throughout covering all the teams. Now, I believe they're going to keep 8 skaters and a goalie because Minnesota is very strong on the back end, and I really do believe that they want to keep all 4 of those defensemen that they have. So we're going to discuss them after we discuss the forwards. So up front, I have the Wild protecting Zach Parise and Matt Zuccarello, guys who are on no move clauses, Kevin Fiala, who I think really broke out last year, and Jordan Greenway. So this ultimately, guys, leaves Joel Eriksson Ek as the player to be exposed for Seattle in the expansion draft. If he's there, I do believe they'll take him. He's a good two-way center. He's still young, very cheap as well. So I believe there's a lot of upside with this pick. So now we're going to look at the back end. So looking at the defense and goaltending of the Minnesota Wild here, we have Jared Spurgeon, Ryan Suter, Matt Dumba, and Jonas Brodin. So for Spurgeon, Suter, and Brodin, they're all on no move clauses, so they have to be kept. And I would be very surprised if they left Matt Dumba exposed to Seattle. But, I think he's still too talented of a player at 26 years old to, be exposed. So I really do believe that they're going to keep him and then only keep 4 forwards. I think it's definitely worth it if you're in Minnesota's shoes. And then looking at the goaltenders, I have them protecting Cam Talbot. Now, Talbot's proven with the Rangers too, especially, and a little bit with Edmonton, that if you give him a strong D-core in front of him, he can play well in net. So I believe that, they just signed him in the offseason. I do believe that they are going to protect Talbot in the expansion draft. And again, guys, I have the Minnesota Wild losing Joel Eriksson Ek, the two-way forward from Sweden, who's only 23 years old, to Seattle in the expansion draft. Moving on now, we are going to be looking at the Nashville Predators. Now, Adam, you really only have 4 forwards highlighted? Yes, I do have 4 forwards highlighted because I do believe Nashville is going to protect 8 skaters and 1 goalie. Now, the reason for this is, like Minnesota, Nashville is a very strong D-core with Yossi, Ellis, Ekholm, and Fabro. I'd be very surprised if they left any of them exposed. So we're going to look at the forwards here quickly, and then we're going to talk in a little bit more in detail about the back end. So for the forwards, Matt Duchene, Ryan Johansson, Philip Forsberg, and Victor Arvidsson, I think are the clear-cut 4 that they have to keep in this situation. And unfortunately, I do have Seattle taking Luke Cunnin from the Nashville Predators, previously acquired at the NHL draft from Minnesota, was drafted a year after Joel Eriksson Ek. So if Cunnin and Eriksson Ek were teammates, I think that'd be pretty funny because they were both Wild prospects a few years ago. So Luke Cunnin's another good two-way forward that, again, has the skill and has the very high character that I believe could be very good for a young Seattle team. He's only 22 years old, and he's only making $925K. So it's a very high upside pick for Seattle here. So that's why I have them taking Luke Cunnin from Nashville. So now looking at the back end of the Nashville Predators on defense, Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, Matthias Ekholm, and Dante Fabro. I think they have to keep all 4 of these guys again. It really does not make sense for them to risk losing any of these 4 to protect like the Calle Yarncrocs and Rocco Grimaldis of the world. For example, I really do believe that Nashville with their D-core, can improve moving forward. I know they didn't have the year they wanted to last year, losing to Arizona in the play-in round, but I have them keeping these 4 defensemen, and I think that'd be the smartest choice for them for sure. And in net, I have them protecting UC Saros. Ascarov's going to be the long-term fix in Nashville, but for the next little while, UC Saros will be the starting goalie, and Pekka Rinne will not be protected by Nashville. I would highly doubt that. So again, guys, I have Luke Cunnin, forward of the Nashville Predators, getting selected by Seattle here. Next up, we have the 2019 Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues. Now, again, Adam, 3 teams in a row with 8 skaters and a goalie. 3 teams? The answer is yes. Again, St. Louis, very strong D-core. I'd be very surprised if they let off any of those guys. And again, these might be the only 3 teams in the NHL that are doing this, but I just find it really funny that they're back to back to back. But again, for St. Louis, I believe it is best if they keep 8 skaters and 1 goalie. And I'll explain. Up front, Vladimir Tarasenko, Ryan O'Reilly, Braden Shen, and Robert Thomas should all be kept. You have a lot of guys in Steen, Schwartz, Bozak, Perron that are going to be expiring deals soon. So why would you want to, run keeping any of these guys? I think the interesting players are Zach Sanford, Sammy Blais are definitely interesting. Ivan Barbashev's another young player. But you see here, guys, I have the St. Louis Blues losing to Seattle in the expansion draft, Jordan Kyrou. Kyrou was on Canada's 2018 World Junior Gold team, where he got assist in the gold medal game and was one of Canada's best consistent forwards throughout the entire tournament. Highly skilled, very good skater. Again, high upside. If he's playing in these big moments, these big minutes, how is he going to perform? So again, be a very interesting pick, but I have Seattle taking Jordan Kyrou if he is left available. So now you see here the 4 defensemen I have the St. Louis Blues protecting. Torrey Krug, who they just signed in free agency, the big ticket item that they signed. They're going to keep him for sure. Justin Falk, they just signed him to a long-term deal. They traded for him last year from Carolina. They're going to keep him most definitely. Colton Parayko was one of the defensemen on the Stanley Cup winning St. Louis Blues in 2019. He's an absolute stud. They're going to keep him too. And they're going to keep Vince Dunn. Vince Dunn is a very young defenseman, still only 24 years old, and he's another guy that, again, if he was on another team like a Shea Theodore, I feel like he would have a very similar production to that kind of player in Shea Theodore, and I really do not think it would be worth it for them to risk losing Vince Dunn versus protecting some of those other forwards that we don't know what's going to happen to them in a year or two. They could be gone regardless. So, again, this is why I have them keeping 8 skaters and 1 goalie, and obviously looking at the goaltenders, Jordan Binnington is the clear-cut obvious choice. He won the Stanley Cup for them in 2019. He came second in Calder voting, so Binnington here is the goalie kept. And again, I have the St. Louis Blues losing to Seattle in the expansion draft, Jordan Kyrou. The last team for the Central Division we are going to be looking at are the Winnipeg Jets. So now I have the Winnipeg Jets protecting 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie. You know, there's a few pretty obvious choices here up front. They're big 5 forwards, which are obviously Blake Wheeler on his no-move clause. They'd be keeping him regardless. Kyle Connor, Patrick Laine, Mark Scheifele, and Nikolai Ehlers. Ehlers actually had a really great year, which I think is great for the Jets. But anyway, those are the 5 that they are for sure keeping. And then the last 2 guys I have the Winnipeg Jets keeping are Jansen Harkins and Jack Roslovic. So Harkins I have them keeping because when he came onto the scene last year, he sort of provided like a spark for Winnipeg. You know, that great 2-way game, all-around game, but also had a lot of offense, which I was very impressed to see. You know, he did pretty well in the playoffs considering Winnipeg did have a lot of injuries. And Jack Roslovic, they took in the first round of 2015, and I believe that they still want to figure out what's going to go on with this guy because I feel like Roslovic, too, is another one of those guys, maybe not as, you know, high impactful as William Karlsson could be, but, you know, that if you give him the first, second line minutes, could he explode? So I believe that they're going to keep Roslovic, and now we are going to look at the back end. Now we are looking at the defense and goaltending of the Winnipeg Jets. So on the back end, I have Winnipeg keeping Josh Morrissey, Neil Pionk, and Dylan DeMello. So again, these are 3 pretty obvious picks. I know Morrissey and Pionk are definitely, but for me, watching a lot of Jets games last year, being a person that does like the Jets, I'm a big fan of Dylan DeMello. He's just a solid, steady defenseman that you're never going to want to scream at on the TV because he's just very solid and well-rounded. You know, he's not going to give you a ton of offense, but he's going to give you what you need in the defensive zone, which is what every team needs. Every team needs a Dylan DeMello type defenseman, and Winnipeg losing all the guys that they did last year, this was a huge, huge ad for them getting him from Ottawa at the trade deadline. So in net, obviously, Connor Hellebuck, he won the Vezina last year. One of the best goalies in the NHL. I personally think right now he is the best, considering how much he had to bail out Winnipeg, even just to get them into the play-in. So I have Hellebuck for sure being kept by Winnipeg. And then looking at it now, you see Sami Niku highlighted in green. That's who I have Seattle taking in the expansion draft if they keep Niku available. Niku was the AHL Defenseman of the Year only a few years ago in 2017-2018 for that season. Now, he still has a lot of offensive upside, but the problem is he hasn't been able to consistently get minutes in the NHL, and he's, again, one of those guys that if he gets the minutes and he gets the playing time, he could explode. He was great, you know, in the AHL, and now we're going to see with elevated minutes on a Seattle team, assuming they take him, how is he going to do? So again, I have defenseman Sami Niku getting drafted by Seattle in the expansion draft. That is it for today, everyone. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please hit that like and subscribe button down below. And stay tuned for next week when we talk about the Atlantic Division. Hope you all have a great day.